Effective leaders don't default to one style, they adapt. Situational leadership teaches that leadership should match the task and team's readiness. When time is short or skills are low, authoritative direction works best. But with a capable, motivated team, democratic or even laissez-faire approaches yield better outcomes. In high-stakes environments like corporate turnarounds or morale crises, transformational leadership provides the vision needed to reset direction. And if the long-term goal is a strong culture, servant leadership becomes essential, removing obstacles and building trust. Think of leadership as a toolkit, not a fixed identity. The challenge is diagnosing each moment and applying the right tool with precision. Misalignment, being too hands-off with a novice or too controlling with an expert, leads to friction and underperformance. True leadership agility lies in matching your approach to both the mission and the moment.
Charlene, you've led through high-stakes corporate environments. How did you learn how to adapt your leadership style to both the mission and the moment?
Well, a lot of it, and I think you've talked about this before, has a lot to do with what you're learning on the job about how to lead. And you quickly learn that hierarchical leadership is quite ineffective. And so what I've really learned is, learning to understand people and what they need and what motivates them. And that requires a leader to really being willing to listen to what people have to say, to active listening. But it also is about paying attention. And as I often say to people, read the room. And even if it's only you and one other person in that room, tie in and make a connection. If you can connect with someone, you can lead someone. If you can connect with your organization, you can effectively lead that organization. And I think that that really is, for me, has been the key to learning how to be a good leader.
I love the idea that, having a one-on-one connection is as important as leading many people.
Mm-hmm.
Tiffany, how has your lived experience shaped your leadership style across whether it's corporate or entrepreneurial life?
I think I call myself like an accidental leader. Like I feel like I kind of fell into this space. And Andy, you may relate with this, but I grew up as the daughter of Asian immigrants, I think I had internalized that my pathway to success was through assimilation and erasure. So effectively just blending in with the wallpaper, not using my voice. And there was some turning point, I think, while I was in university and, wanting to pursue a career in financial services, where I realized that, me stepping up and leading by example and also leading with vulnerability would help empower everyone else who may have shared identities with me as well.
Yeah, I think we can relate. And I'm sure that Charlene and Heather have thoughts as women of color.
No, it's been such an easy road, Andy. I don't know what you're talking about here.
You talk about the responsibility of being an only, right, Charlene?
Oh,
and
I
like,
do.
what kind of pressure does that put on you as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for Heather, so I will let Heather speak for herself. But the idea of being an only is both a privilege and a pleasure. It's a privilege because you're the trailblazer and you are actually trying to, blaze a path that other people who look like you can follow. The challenge and the responsibility of it is that if you make a mistake or anything that you do, for a lot of people who don't look like you, you are representing your entire race, your entire gender. And so you don't feel like you have the room to make mistakes that other people may have the room to do. Because it's like, if I don't perform, if I don't do this in exactly the way it is supposed to be done and be successful, then the next young, ambitious Black little girl that comes up it may have to suffer another consequence that she doesn't deserve. And I think I want to commend you, Andy, for having a panel of all women, which I think is just fantastic. And I'm sure both Heather and Tiffany can speak on this as well.
Heather, I want to ask you, since Tiffany mentioned, listening and, being open as a leader, can you talk about, because you've been on both ends of caring leadership, can you tell us the difference between a leader shifting from directive to listen first and caring?
That's a good one. I think you have to really have a level of curiosity of what's happening with the other person across from you in order to make a shift. And I say that because oftentimes we're really self-centered, and I'm saying we because that's kind of all of us. With human nature, we're here to protect ourselves. We're figuring out what's important to our backyard, right? Instead of saying, what's happening to those around us? How does that impact the productivity, the performance of the team? How does that help? What's happening with them at home? And so it's being really curious about the whole person that's in front of us. And it's so interesting because the other day I was talking to someone and I said, I say the word whole person and people are immediately going to think, oh, it's DEI. And I think to myself, this is about us understanding the people that are across from us. As Tiffany said earlier, I think it might have been Charlene. Both of them were kind of alluding to this, which is we can't really connect to people. We can't really relate to people unless we understand who they are and we take that time to understand them. And so listening is a huge tool for leadership. And going over to what Charlene was talking about related to being being the one who represents, it is so true where you feel like that. And I found myself, I left corporate America because I felt like I was in that space. And I was able to take back my power when I became an entrepreneur 8 years ago to say, now I don't have to fit into a mold. While you do to a certain extent, even when you're working with external clients and corporate clients, and they still kind of have these expectations, you can fire a customer. You can decide you don't want to work with this person when you're an entrepreneur. You don't have to go along to get along.
Right. And can I just build on something that Tiffany said, because it's something that I had to learn, which is the power of vulnerability. My entire career for 33 years until I decided to go out on my own and recover from being a corporate executive. My entire career, vulnerability was a weakness. And so you never showed a weakness. Therefore, you never showed vulnerability, which means you never really showed humanity. And where this really came to roost for me is and I talk about this in my book, I went through a 5-year cancer battle that was only supposed to be 7 months. And initially, I kept it to myself because I wanted to be strong. And I thought it was so important that I show up strong. And I got to a point where I couldn't show up strong anymore. And quite honestly, that's when I saw the best in the people that I was charged with leading. Because suddenly, I was able to let go of the perfection and let go of the performance of leadership and be present. And I had no other choice but to be that way because I was just, quite frankly, too darn sick to do anything else. And that's when I really learned the power and the strength of being a vulnerable leader rather than a perfect leader. And Tiffany had mentioned vulnerability, and I would not want this time to go by without people hearing from all of us and understanding that there really is power in vulnerability and no longer performing leadership, but being present. And I just don't think that can be understated.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. What's interesting. So I started my career in investment banking. And what was interesting was I got the piece of advice I got for how to succeed as, a woman in finance was to master your poker face. And what was interesting, and the reason why I made sure I included vulnerability is I believe it was in 2016, I read Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. And that book, I think, really transformed, how do I go from feeling like I had to fit into this corporate culture to being my own type of leader. And what I found was that not only did I become more relatable, but I also think, to your point of view only, it provided more possibility for everyone who's, following or an aspiring leader to realize that that's accessible for them too.
Yeah, I always say, try to be a culture contributor, not necessarily a cultural fit. Because that's how you bring, your power and yourself into an organization and to other people. But I think we also have to be truthful in that 10 years ago, you didn't have the room to be a cultural contributor. You could only be a cultural fit, period, hard stop.
I love hearing these common threads, whether it's vulnerability or different, shared experiences. I want to ask the three of you, since you spend all your time in this topic of leadership, because we often hear stories of great leaders in sports, in business, in the military, in nonprofits. To what extent do you think leadership skills are transferable? Like, can you just take a great leader and drop her or him from one spot into another? Heather, what are your thoughts?
And I would say the answer is yes, and it's because if you look at the foundation of what makes great leadership, and I do think curiosity and listening are huge. I do think vulnerability is at the foundation of that. I think a willingness to learn and be wrong and make mistakes, admit those, bring the team along is all a part of it. So no matter where you're at, if you're great in that, you move over here, you still are going to be great because you're going to immediately move into curiosity, learning, inclusion, including people's voices around the table, so that you don't make assumptions that you're the only one who has the right answer. So yes, I think that you can make it and be successful in any area if you have those as a foundation.
Charlene, what do you think?
Oh, I absolutely agree with what Heather is saying, because I think good leadership is tied to being aligned to your values, and those don't change because your environment changed. Right. I mean, you may have to, I think in the earlier video, it talked about situational leadership, and that's not about changing who you are, changing your values, or changing how you align to your values. It might change how you connect to people, because, you have to meet people where they are, but a good leader can be dropped into any environment and will still be a good leader as long as they stay true to themselves. Is when we move away from who we are that we just muck up everything.
How about you, Tiffany?
I like this idea of like the situational awareness as a leader, because one of the things I'm actually getting really curious about is, do I have to be a leader in every space, right? And so as we opened, I shared, I actually just started climbing this year. And one of the things that's been interesting is, because I know I'm newer to this space, I'm taking more of a role of what I would call like quiet leadership, where I'm just observing and listening and learning, because I also know that I'm new, right? So I think I'm just finding that agility as well, that I think we have to have as leaders, to know, okay, in this particular space, I don't need to be loud. I don't need to take control. And it's okay for me to take a pause. And it's okay if in this particular space, I decide that I don't want to lead, And so how can we also have the flexibility and grace, just as human beings, to choose how we want to decide? And it's all versions of our authentic self. I like to tell people, I actually do believe that we have the capacity to be our full authentic selves. We're just not bringing 100% of it to every situation at every point in time. Maybe there are some things I bring to my mental health team, that I'm not bringing into the workplace, right? So again, it's still 100% me, just different parts of it are showing up at different times.
Right. One thing I talk about, Andy, is when it comes to leadership, we often think about leading others. An important part of leadership is self-leadership and understanding. I think I'm building off of what Tiffany just said, is understanding how to lead yourself as well. Because if you can't lead yourself, you really can't lead others. And, it is about being your authentic self, but it's also about knowing who your authentic self is. And sometimes we don't know who we are because we've spent so much time in these environments creating this facade or this, this persona of who we needed to be in order to be successful, that it's important to take the time to step back and say, who am I really? Who am I authentically, so that I can show up in a way that is right for me. And I applaud the fact that right now, and I hope it lasts, we are in an era where people want to see authenticity. They don't want to see perfection. And I think that starts with self-leadership.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm just excited to be spending this time with all of you. I think leadership is something that I never had a class in school
You're right.
on this subject. And all too often, it's something that we just learn by doing, and you fall on your face, you stumble, you make mistakes. And this is a subject that can really help us to make improvements in our lives and improve our financial situations. So let's go to segment 2.